We're in St. Bridgets Cathedral, which dates back to 1223 AD. What we're looking at today, I suppose, is a refurb that was done at the end of the 19th century. It was reopened in 1896, but the original cathedral was built here by the Normans in 1223. So they come to Kildare essentially because it's still a very important religious foundation, which dates back to the late 5th century when a lady called Brigids arrives in Kildare. This lady, Brigids, who is the patroness or the female saint of Ireland. She sets up a church here on this site, which at that time would have been a small wooden church. By the 19th century, the cathedral is almost completely in ruin. Where the altar stands today, that was the only part of the church that was usable, and they had this tiny little kind of pro-cathedral added on to there, which was used for normal service. The rest of the cathedral was in complete and utter ruin. A project was created whereby they were going to save what was left of the cathedral. That was begun in the 1870s. And it was reopened in 1896. Major renovations had to be done from time to time, major repairs to the roof and so on. And in the 1980s into the 1990s, there was a FOSS scheme that was engaged with some of the roof repairs, some of the stone repair. And they carved out new gargoyles, I suppose we'll call them, which are above the weather chutes, the downpipes around the exterior of the cathedral. Strangely enough, they're carved in the likeness of people who were attached to the project. So you have the local contractors, you have members of the select vestry, and you have I suppose the architects, the people involved in the project. And their likeness now forever preserved in stone. And it's strange because on a medieval building you now look upwards and you see people with spectacles, for instance. And as far as we know, the Normans never had spectacles. As you enter the cathedral, you see a very curious sight of skull and crossbones. And of course, children the world over immediately think of pirates. It's a memento mori. So as we enter this great cathedral, it reminds us that we are human and that eventually we will perish, we will die. Inside the cathedral, you have a much clearer and a less weathered version, and it shows a date in the four corners of 1708. One of the strangest symbols within the cathedral has to be a shield in a gig, a pagan fertility symbol, not something that we'd expect to be in the cathedral. It is on a tomb of Walter Wellesley, the last Bishop of Kildare at the time of the Reformation. And a shield in a gig, as I say, a pagan fertility symbol, usually a naked or semi-naked female with her wares on display. So, I mean, not really what we'd imagine would be carved onto a bishop's tomb. Part of the fabric of the cathedral, of course, is the curious roof. Inside, it looks like an upturned boat, which reminds us kind of the story of Noah and the Ark, and that we're within this blessed vessel. But of course, you have to have access to a roof, and hidden away behind a secret door is a circular staircase, which brings us up to what is known as the Monk's Walk, which is the central tower of the cathedral, and essentially you can walk around the entire upper level of that cathedral. Most curious are the windows. You have a beautiful window of Brigids and Conlon, who would have been her first bishop here at Kildare. The most important stained glass windows, I suppose, are the three at the rear of the church and the three above the altar, and they're certainly from the earliest part of the reconstruction. In the stained glass, over here you will have the dean's names or families who contribute money towards the reconstruction, towards repair. So quite often they're remembered forever in the stained glass windows or in the plaques along the wall. Well-known families such as the Medlicotts from Dunmurry Hill, who were the magistrates, justices of the peace, and they lost a son in World War I. and one of the plaques is dedicated to him. Cathedrals are built by master craftsmen, and we have to remember that when we're actually inside in the cathedral. You know, the actual building of it in itself is a marvel. Most notably, if you look closely at the altar, the left-hand wall of the altar is very straight. On the right-hand side, it runs almost like it's at an angle. And when you step back to the very bottom of the cathedral, you're looking at more of one wall than the other. And that is built into the fabric to depict our Lord's head on the cross. One of the most curious features in the fabric of the building, the exterior fabric of the building, of course, is this hole in the wall. What essentially it has become used for is a place where people can kneel. You place your arm through the wall and you pivot your shoulder in so that you can actually reach around and touch your heart. And you say a prayer in the presence of Bridget, the presence of Bridgets Church. One of the things you notice as you're walking around the cathedral and around the base of the round tower and so on is that it's a graveyard. And it reminds us that this is a functioning church, that this still holds service here on a Sunday morning, and from time to time you would have an interment. Although obviously I'd say at this stage the graveyard is largely full. What you have is a burial of both Catholic and Protestant. This is an Anglican, it is a Protestant church, and it has been from the time of the Reformation. A curious burial would be, say, a Roman Catholic priest buried in the grounds of Kildare Cathedral. You also have a Republican family, a very strong Republican family, who would have had a grave here within St. Bridget's Cathedral grounds. Also within the grounds of the graveyard, you have 4 World War I graves. These graves are instantly recognisable the world over. The exact same tablet that is used to mark the passage of men who had served during the wars. The round tower of Kildare is striking. Technically, I suppose if it had its original conical top, it would be the tallest round tower in Ireland. It's 108 feet high. It's certainly the tallest that you can climb today. When you're looking at the round tower, you notice immediately 2 types of stone. There's a firm granite base, and from, I suppose, 12 or so feet upwards, you have a limestone, which would have been sourced locally. The granite would have had to come from Wicklow. The limestone, it's assumed, came from the quarries near Recounting. We expect them to be kind of straight up, but they taper in from the very base to the very top. It's standing over 1,000 years. And the reason for that is this tapering, this very clever method of construction. The tower predates the cathedral, but it only dates to the end of the 11th century. When we were young, we would have believed, or we were taught, that it was built especially to kind of, in times of trouble when the Vikings attacked, that you could use it for its defensive capabilities. In more recent times, the idea that it is a bell tower, a click chalk, and that essentially they were built as, I suppose, a signpost upon the landscape, and a bell tower which would call people to service, or in times of danger, it would warn people. But also, obviously, if you're at the top of the round tower, you can see into the distance. You can see out towards Monasterevan and the Barrow, out to the Hill of Allen and the Red Hills, almost to the Liffey, across the plains of the Curragh. So you can see your enemies coming, you can see your guests, and also, obviously, if you're ringing the bell at the top of that tower, calling people to service, you're sending out a message across the land.